This happened back in the spring of 2017 when I was a junior in college. I was in this beach town in Florida for spring break with a bunch of friends. It was one of those trips where every day was a blur of sun, sand, and cheap beer. The town itself was a madhouse, packed with students from all over, loud music blaring from every corner, and the streets were just a sea of people. Honestly, it was a lot, and by Thursday night, I was exhausted. My feet were killing me from dancing, and all I wanted was my bed back at the hotel, which was a good 15-minute drive from the main drag. I didn't want to walk, and a cab would have cost a fortune, so I did what everyone else did. I pulled out my phone and ordered a rideshare. The app told me to look for a silver Toyota Camry, and the driver's name was Mitch. I thought, perfect, a quick trip home, and I can finally crash. I found the car pretty fast, and as I got in, a guy in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed gray beard and a faded Miami Dolphins baseball cap greeted me. He had this unsettlingly calm vibe about him, not like the rowdy college kids or the rushed locals I'd seen all week. He was humming a weird, slow tune under his breath as I buckled up. The inside of the car was eerily clean, with this faint, almost sweet, musky smell, like old books mixed with something a little medicinal, like Vicks VapoRub. The conversation started out normal enough. He asked if I was a student, if I was having a good time, and he mentioned how crazy the town gets this time of year. I just mumbled some polite answers, my eyes glued to the map on my phone, watching the little blued that was supposed to be me, moving along the predetermined route. Everything seemed fine for the first few minutes, just the typical small talk you make with a stranger in a car. But then, I noticed a slight deviation. A minor one, at first. Just a turn a block earlier than the GPS suggested that I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a one-way street or a quick shortcut. But then, it happened again. He made a left when the GPS was clearly telling him to go straight. That's when I felt this weird knot tighten in my stomach. I looked up from my phone and asked, "Hey, are we still on the right way to the hotel? The map on my phone looks a little different." He just chuckled, a low, dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, the GPS. It doesn't know this town like I do. Too many people, too many parties tonight. I'm just taking a little detour to avoid all the traffic on the main streets. We'll be there in no time, trust me." His voice was calm, almost too calm, which only made me more uneasy. I tried to convince myself he was right, that he was just being helpful, but the route on my phone was now showing a solid, ominous black line veering off into a completely unknown part of the city. With every turn, the streets got darker and emptier. The vibrant noise of the beach town faded away, replaced by a deep, suffocating silence. The streetlights became fewer and further between, and the houses we passed were no longer the brightly painted vacation rentals I was used to seeing. They were old, decaying structures with boarded-up windows and overgrown yards. A sick, cold feeling started to creep up my spine. This wasn't a shortcut, it was a path to nowhere. I kept my eyes on my phone, watching the little blue dot get further and further away from anything recognizable. I tried to act casual, to not let on how panicked I was becoming. I fumbled with my purse, trying to get my phone into a position where I could discreetly text my roommate. My fingers were trembling as I tried to type out "wrong way" and "help." But then, the dreaded "no service" alert popped up on my screen. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. I was completely cut off. The silence in the car became a living thing, thick and heavy, filling the space between us. I was a statue, my body rigid with fear, my eyes darting between my useless phone and the passing scenery, which had now turned truly bizarre. We were in what looked like an old industrial park. Rusty, skeletal warehouses loomed on both sides of the road, their windows shattered like missing teeth. We passed a huge, rusted-out sign for a place called the Serpent's Coil, which was nothing more than a pile of collapsed sheet metal. The whole air outside felt stale and humid, even with the car windows up. All I could hear was the low thrum of the engine and the driver's eerie humming. It wasn't a song I recognized. It was a repetitive, off-key melody that seemed to have no beginning or end, like a child's lullaby played backwards. Then, without taking his eyes off the road, Mitch spoke again, his voice as flat and calm as before. "You know, all those maps, they only show you what everyone else sees. The loud places, the crowded places, the places that drain all the life out of you." I didn't answer. I just stared at the lock on the car door, praying it was one of those old-fashioned ones I could just pull up. My heart leaped into my throat when I realized it wasn't. It was an electronic lock, a small, black square on the door panel that was clearly illuminated in the locked position. He had locked me, and a wave of pure, gut-wrenching nausea washed over me. The sweet, medicinal smell that had been faint before was now cloying and suffocating, making my stomach churn. The hum from Mitch had stopped, and the silence was even worse. He finally turned his head slightly, just enough to catch my wide-eyed reflection in the rearview mirror. His gaze was unervingly placid. "The real city," he continued, his words slow and deliberate, "is in the quiet corners. The forgotten places. The places that still remember." He took one hand off the steering wheel and held it out, palm up. I instinctively flinched, but he didn't move it. He just held it there, perfectly still. I looked at it, and a chill went through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. His knuckles were smooth, almost unnaturally so, but the palm of his hand was covered in a series of tiny, almost imperceptible scars, like someone had pricked him with a needle hundreds of times. They formed a pattern, a series of complex, swirling lines that reminded me of spider webs or a bizarre, intricate map. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. He wasn't a normal rideshare driver. He wasn't even a crazy guy taking me for a joyride. He was something else entirely, and he was taking me to a place where no one else could ever find me. I was completely trapped. I opened my mouth, a choked sob escaping before I could form a single word. "Please," I managed to stammer out, my voice cracking. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home." My whole body was shaking so violently that I could hear my teeth chattering. He finally took his hand off the steering wheel and placed it gently on the dashboard, his movements slow and deliberate, as if I wasn't even there. "Home?" he said, the words sounding alien and foreign coming from his mouth. "But we're already almost there. This is a much better home. A quiet one." He wasn't looking at me, but at the windshield, as if he could see something I couldn't. Then, he took a sharp right turn, and the smooth hum of the tires on asphalt was replaced by the sickening crunch of gravel under the wheels. The car jostled and rattled, and the faint glow from the faraway city lights was completely swallowed up by the darkness. There was nothing but the beam of his headlights cutting a path through the gnarled trees and overgrown bushes that seemed to press in on us from all sides. My pleas for him to stop were met with nothing but silence. The car crawled for what felt like an eternity before the headlights illuminated a structure up ahead. It was an old, dilapidated brick building with a huge, rusted metal door and no windows, surrounded by a chain-link fence that was falling apart. It looked like an abandoned pump house or something, long forgotten by time. The air here was heavy and damp, smelling of decay and rust. He pulled the car to a slow stop right in front of the gate. Without a word, he unbuckled his seatbelt and pushed open his door. I heard the lock mechanism click on the driver's side, but the passenger door remained stubbornly, terrifyingly locked. As he got out, I threw myself at the door handle, yanking on it with all my strength, my fingernails scraping against the smooth plastic. I screamed, a desperate, raw sound that felt like it was tearing my throat apart. I pounded on the window, but the glass was thick and unyielding. Through the windshield, I saw him walking toward the old building, his silhouette a dark, hunched figure in the beam of his own headlights. He reached the gate and fumbled with a large, old-fashioned padlock. He seemed to be taking his time, as if he knew I couldn't get out and was just waiting for me to exhaust myself. He finally got the gate open, and as he turned back toward the car, the headlights caught his face fully. There was no rage, no madness, no triumph. Just a flat, empty expression, like he was doing a chore. My heart seized in my chest. He was just a guy with a job to do, and I was the last part of his list. I watched, frozen in terror, as he calmly walked back, reached the passenger door, and without a word, pulled the handle. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, but he didn't move. He just stood there, the car door wide open, revealing the inky blackness behind him. The air was cold, but a rush of suffocating heat swept over me. My breath hitched in my throat as he slowly raised his right hand. In the pale moonlight, I could just make out a small, glinting object he held between his thumb and index finger. It wasn't a knife or a gun. It was a small, ornate key, its head shaped like a spiral, just like the scars on his hand. He wasn't looking at me, but at the key. as if admiring it. That tiny moment was all it took. My brain, completely unhinged by terror, bypassed all logic and went straight to instinct. I drew my leg back, and with all the strength my panicked body could muster, I slammed my foot right into his groin. It was a desperate, ungraceful movement, but it connected with a sickening thud. The effect was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. There was no howl of pain, no agonized cry. He just let out a low, guttural grunt, more like a startled animal than a human being. He staggered back a couple of steps, his body lurching awkwardly, but he didn't fall. That single, shocked moment was my chance. I scrambled out of the car, tearing past him and not looking back. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. The only thing that mattered was putting as much space between me and that man, that car, and that terrifying pump house as I possibly could. I ran blindly through the rough gravel, tripping and stumbling over rocks and roots, the sound of my ragged breathing the only thing I could hear. I expected to feel his hands on me, to hear his calm voice right behind my ear, telling me to stop, but there was nothing. Just the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears that I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire and a searing pain shot up my leg. I finally collapsed, sobbing, into a thick patch of bushes, my body heaving with desperate gasps for air. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for him to appear, for the car's headlights to shine on me. But the darkness remained, silent and still. After a few minutes of nothing, I pushed myself up, my body aching and trembling, and listened. Silence. Total, unnerving silence. Then, through the dense trees, I saw it. A faint, distant glow. It was the lights of the city, a blurry beacon of civilization. The sight filled me with a sudden surge of adrenaline and hope. I got to my feet and, ignoring the pain, started to make my way toward it, stumbling through the brush until I finally found a paved road. I had run in a giant circle, and I was back on the main road, just a few miles from the edge of town, that I eventually found my way back to the heart of the city, a disheveled, sobbing mess. I flagged down a police officer on a street corner, and I told him everything. The rideshare, the detour, the weird driver, the pump house. He listened with a practiced, weary patience, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. He looked for the car and the driver on his system, but found nothing. Mitch wasn't a registered driver with the rideshare company. The trip had never officially happened. The car I had described wasn't in any of their records. There was no evidence, no struggle, no bruises, nothing but my terrified account of a ride that never existed. To this day, the memory is as vivid as the day it happened. I've never used a rideshare service again, and I still can't shake the feeling that he wasn't just some crazy guy. I think about those strange scars on his hand and that old pump house in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes, on a cold night, I'll be in my car and for a split second, I'll smell that same faint, sweet, medicinal scent and my hands will start to shake. And I'll find myself checking the lock, just in case. It's crazy how a single moment can completely rewrite your memories. Like, you think back on a time, and it's all sun-drenched and perfect, but then something happens, and that whole period gets this dark filter on it. That's what spring break of 19 feels like to me now. Back then, it was supposed to be our big escape. Me, a scrawny, wide-eyed kid named Leo who was obsessed with old-school horror movies. My best friend, Mike, a practical joker with a laugh that could fill a stadium. His girlfriend, Sarah, who was super organized and had this quiet confidence. And my girlfriend, Chloe, a ball of energy who saw the world in vivid colors. We were all juniors in college, a bit older than the usual spring break crowd, and this trip was our reward for surviving a brutal semester. We had saved up all year, pooling our money to rent this epic Airbnb down in North Myrtle Beach. It was this old two-story beach house, kind of rustic and a little worn around the edges, but it was all ours for a week. We weren't looking for wild parties. We just wanted a place to chill, eat junk food, and feel like real adults for the first time. The first night was exactly what we'd pictured. We grabbed some pizza, threw on a movie, and just reveled in the freedom of being away from our parents. The house had this strange, musty smell, a mix of old wood and salty air, but it felt authentic. We were all sprawled out in the living room, laughing and talking, when Chloe and I decided to head up to our room for the night. Our room was on the second floor, right above the living room. It was pretty sparse, a big bed, a rickety dresser, and a window that looked out onto the beach. It was a clear night, and the moonlight was streaming in, making everything feel serene. I remember laying on the bed, just staring at the ceiling, thinking about how lucky we were. That's when my eyes caught this tiny, almost imperceptible detail. High up on the ceiling, right above the bed, where you'd expect a smoke detector to be, there was something else. A small, black plastic dome with a tiny, blinking red light. It was so subtle, I almost missed it. My heart gave a weird little jolt, a feeling like a cold hand had just brushed my spine. I nudged Chloe. "Hey, what do you think that is?" and pointed. She followed my gaze, and her playful smile slowly faded as she saw it too. "Probably just a weird smoke detector," she said, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could hear the edge in her voice. The rational part of my brain wanted to agree, but the part that watched too many true crime documentaries was screaming. We had to check. I pulled a chair from the corner of the room, and Chloe held it steady while I climbed up, my hands a little shaky. The closer I got, the clearer the details became. It wasn't a smoke detector. It was a small, round object, maybe 2 inches in diameter, and the little red light pulsed with a chilling, rhythmic beat. I reached out and carefully twisted it. It came off with a quiet click. In my hand, it felt heavy, and on the back, I could make out a tiny lens and a little antenna. It was a hidden camera. My blood went cold. My first instinct was to panic, but I looked at Chloe's face, pale in the moonlight, and knew I had to stay calm. That I climbed down, holding the camera like it was a live grenade. "It's a camera," I whispered, the words feeling foreign and unreal on my tongue. Chloe's eyes went wide. She grabbed her phone and started furiously typing, her fingers flying across the screen. We knew we had to get the others. I went downstairs, the camera still clutched in my hand, and found Mike and Sarah still on the couch, half asleep. I showed them the thing, and the look of confusion on their faces morphed into shock and then pure, unadulterated anger. Mike, usually the loudest of us all, was eerily quiet. "Are you serious?" he muttered, his jaw tight. Sarah, always the most level-headed, immediately took control. "Let's call the host through the app. Don't say anything to him yet. Just explain the situation calmly and see what he says." Mike wanted to go straight to the police, but Sarah was right. We needed proof that the host was involved. We used Sarah's phone and sent a message. The host, a guy named Richard with a 5-star rating, responded within minutes. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," he wrote. "It must have been left by the previous guests. I had no idea." It was the most robotic, insincere apology I've ever seen. We asked for a refund or to switch to another property he owned, but he flat out refused, saying, "I can't be held responsible for things left by others." His response was a wall of stone, and it was so obvious he was lying. He wasn't surprised at all. He just played along with a script, a prepared one. He probably had been through this before, I thought. That's when the first real wave of fear washed over me. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. Someone had put this camera here to watch us, and the man who owned the house was complicit. He had been planning this the whole time. With Richard's stone-cold refusal, the mood in the house went from stressed to full-on panicked. The 4 of us just stood in the living room, the hidden camera sitting on the coffee table between us like a grotesque centerpiece. We knew we had to leave, but there was a huge problem. We had no other place to go. It was spring break, and every hotel and every other rental in town was booked solid. We tried calling a few places, but it was just a dead end. We were trapped. The worst part was, we couldn't even go to the police right away. What would we say? A guy put a camera in our room, and now he won't give us a refund? We had the camera as evidence, but we knew it would take hours, maybe days, to file a report and have them investigate. And who knew what would happen in the meantime? We were stuck there for the night, and the fear began to settle in. It felt like we were characters in a horror movie, and the villain had just locked the door. That night was the longest of my life. Mike and I pulled the mattress from our room downstairs to the living room so we could all sleep together, a sort of pathetic attempt at a fortress. We were all on edge, jumpy at every creak and groan the old housemaid. Around 2 a.m., as we were all trying to pretend to be asleep, a new sound cut through the silence. It was coming from the back of the house, near the kitchen, a faint, metallic scraping sound. Mike, who was a light sleeper, sat bolt upright. "Did you guys hear that?" he whispered. We all had. It wasn't the sound of an animal or a tree branch against the window. It was the distinct sound of someone fiddling with the lock on the back door. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like someone was trying different keys, one after another, trying to find the one that fit. My blood ran cold. My heart started pounding in my ears. We all just froze, huddled together on the mattress, listening to that terrifying, rhythmic scraping. It went on for what felt like an eternity, at least 5 solid minutes of a person systematically trying to get into the house. We didn't dare move or make a sound. Finally, after a few more scrapes, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more deafening than the noise had been. When the scraping finally stopped, we all stayed completely still for what felt like an eternity, listening for any other sound. Nothing. The house was dead quiet again, but the quiet felt different this time, not peaceful, but full of threat. We were so terrified that we couldn't even bring ourselves to talk. Eventually, the sun started to rise, and the first rays of light cut through the blinds, casting long, strange shadows across the room. We all looked like hell, pale, with dark circles under our eyes, and a frantic look in our gazes. No one had slept a wink. We knew we couldn't stay a minute longer. We just had to get out of there, with or without a refund. We decided to pack up our stuff as fast as we could and just drive all the way back home, pulling an all-nighter. The plan was to be gone before the host or whoever was outside came back. As we were grabbing our bags, Mike suddenly froze, staring at the coffee table. The camera, the one I had taken down from the ceiling, it was gone. We had all seen it there just a few hours ago, sitting right in the middle of the table. I checked under the table, in the chairs, everywhere. It wasn't there. A new wave of dread washed over us, worse than the sound at the door. "No way," Sarah said, her voice a barely audible whisper. "How is that even possible?" The realization hit us like a physical blow. Someone had been in the house while we were all inside, huddled on the mattress, pretending to sleep. While we were listening to someone trying to get in through the back door, another person had been inside with us the whole time, in the living room, grabbing the camera. The thought of that, of someone silently moving around in the dark, just feet away from us, was more terrifying than anything we had experienced. That's when we saw it. On the side of the table where the camera had been, there was a small, crudely drawn smiley face, etched into the wood. The fear we felt before was nothing compared to this. It was a message, a sick, twisted acknowledgement that they knew we had found the camera and that they were watching our every move. It was a taunt. We were no longer just a couple of college kids on a fun trip. We were their playthings. Their whole plan was to terrorize us, and we didn't know why. We didn't know how far they would go. With that crude smiley face burned into our minds, we scrambled out of the house like our lives depended on it. We didn't even bother with breakfast or a last look at the beach. We just threw everything into the car, not even caring if it was organized, and peeled out of the driveway. The entire drive back, the atmosphere in the car was heavy, thick with a fear we couldn't shake. Every car that got too close felt like a threat. Every person we saw on the street felt like they might know something. We drove for hours in almost complete silence, the silence only punctuated by the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Sarah. We were all lost in our own thoughts, replaying every terrifying moment, wondering what we had missed. Why us? What did they want? Was it a sick game, or was it something more? We got back to campus late that night, exhausted and traumatized. The moment we stepped back into our normal lives, the events of the last 24 hours started to feel more like a bizarre nightmare than a real event. We decided not to go to the police right away, and it was a joint decision. We were all just so rattled and afraid of what might happen if we pushed it further. Instead, we did the only thing we could think of. We left a detailed, honest review on the Airbnb page. I wrote most of it, describing everything. The hidden camera, the host's dismissive response, the scraping at the door, and the chilling discovery of the camera's disappearance and the smiley face. I didn't hold back, using every single terrifying detail to warn future guests. We all gave the review 5 stars to trick the algorithm into showing our review to a broader audience. It was a strange, messed up 5-star rating, a cry for help disguised as a positive review. The next day, the entire listing was gone. Richard's profile was deleted. It was like he had never existed. It didn't solve the mystery or make us feel any better, but it was a small victory, a tiny act of defiance against the unknown terror we had faced. To this day, We still have no idea who he was or why he did what he did. That week was supposed to be about freedom and fun, but it ended up being a twisted lesson in how fragile our sense of security really is. This all went down back in 2018, during my sophomore year of college. I was a hyper-caffeinated, sleep-deprived art student living off instant noodles and the illusion of a social life. My friends and I were sick of the typical spring break scene. The crowded beaches, the sticky floors of cheap bars, the sound of pop music blaring everywhere you went. We wanted peace, quiet, something different. So, a group of 6 of us, me, my best friend Liam, his girlfriend Chloe, and 3 other guys from our dorm, decided to rent a cabin on a remote lake a few hours north of the city. The cabin itself was this ancient, wooden thing, practically swallowed by a forest of pine trees that smelled like a mix of wet earth and sap. It was a proper A-frame with a huge window overlooking a lake that was still too cold to swim in for long, but we didn't care. The solitude was what we were paying for. The first day was perfect. We set up a bonfire, cracked open a few beers, and just hung out, talking and laughing until the stars came out. It was exactly the escape we'd been dreaming of. But on the second night, around midnight, things started to get weird. The fire was dying down, and the 6 of us were all huddled around the fireplace inside, half asleep and just enjoying the quiet. That's when it happened. 3 distinct, rhythmic knocks on the front door. Not a single, hard bang, but a deliberate, almost polite tap, tap, tap. We all froze. Liam, who was always the first to crack a joke, snorted. Must be some of our buddies playing a prank. How the hell did they even find this place? We laughed it off, assuming they'd seen our Instagram stories and tracked us down. But as the silence stretched on, the knocks came again. This time, they were louder, harder, a lot less friendly. It was a bang, bang, bang that seemed to echo through the entire cabin. The laughs from before completely died out. We all just stared at the door, trying to figure out if we were imagining it. Liam finally got up and walked over, pressing his ear against the cold wood. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice way too quiet for someone who was trying to sound tough. Nothing, just the wind rustling outside. He stood there for a good minute, and just as he was about to turn away, a new sound came from the other side. Not knocking, but a slow, deliberate scrape, like a giant fingernail being dragged down the wooden siding of the cabin. It started near the front door, went past the window, and kept going all the way around the back. It was a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up, and I wasn't the only one. Chloe was gripping my arm so tight I could feel her nails digging in. It was like something was circling the cabin, and it was doing it so slowly, so deliberately, that it felt like a threat that we stayed completely silent, glued to our spots, listening to that awful scraping sound. It was loud enough that we all knew we weren't hallucinating. The sound finally stopped when it reached the back of the cabin, right outside one of the bedroom windows. Then, nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that's thicker and heavier than any noise. We waited for what felt like an hour, our hearts pounding so loud I was sure whatever was outside could hear them. The scraping never came back, and after a while, Liam, who had been standing guard by the front door, just shrugged and went back to his spot by the fire, pretending like he wasn't completely shaken. "Probably a deer or something scratching its antlers on the wood," he said, and no one dared to challenge him, even though we all knew that wasn't what it was. We all just decided to go to bed, not talking about it, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. It was like the air in the cabin had changed that I woke up the next morning to the smell of coffee and bacon, but the weird feeling from the night before hadn't gone away. The sun was streaming through the big front window, and it made the whole cabin feel a lot less creepy. We decided to shake off the unsettling vibes by going for a walk around the lake. As we stepped outside, the air was crisp and cool, and a light mist was rising off the water. The ground was soft and muddy from the rain we'd had a few days earlier. We walked right past the front door, and that's when we saw them. The footprints. Not just a few, but a whole ring of them. They started near the edge of the woods, went past the front door, circled the cabin, and then disappeared back into the trees. They were impossibly large, like someone with feet the size of dinner plates had been walking around. And they weren't just shallow impressions. They were deep, almost like a heavy person had been stomping. The weirdest part, though, wasn't just the size. It was the pattern. The footprints were all going in the same direction, tracing a perfect circle around the cabin, never once going out of line. It was like something had just walked in a continuous, deliberate loop all night long. We followed the tracks, our boots sinking into the mud, our conversation replaced with a stunned silence. The prints led all the way up to the base of the windows, the very same windows we'd been peering out of the night before, and then down to the edge of the lake. We looked for tire marks, anything that would suggest a car or a boat, but there was nothing. It was just a clean, muddy path leading to and from the woods, as if whatever made the tracks had simply appeared out of nowhere, watched us for hours, and then vanished without a trace. It was the kind of creepy that gets under your skin, a feeling of being a helpless, ignorant spectator to something far bigger and more ancient than ourselves. That day, the light feeling of vacation was completely gone, replaced with a cold, creeping dread. We all felt it, but none of us knew what to say. Liam tried to be the voice of reason, the kind of guy who would always find a logical explanation for everything, but even his face was pale. We all knew a deer didn't leave tracks like that. No animal we knew of could make a perfect circle of such deep, heavy footprints. And the idea that someone, a person, could be out there stalking us in the dead of night without a car or a boat was even more terrifying. We stood there, looking at the evidence of whatever had been circling us, and a new kind of silence settled over the group. It wasn't the peaceful quiet we'd come for. It was the tense, suffocating kind that comes before a storm. The six of us, who had been so relaxed and happy just hours ago, were now a tight-knit knot of silent fear. The day that was supposed to be filled with sunshine and fun felt heavy with a sense of dread we couldn't shake. And we spent the rest of the day mostly inside, the curtains drawn, trying to act like everything was normal. We played cards, put on a movie, anything to fill the air and distract from the memory of the knocks and the scraping. But every single time someone went to the bathroom or got up for a drink, they'd glance at the windows, a nervous habit that we all picked up without even realizing it. The evening came, and with it, the dread. The sun set, and the woods outside turned from a vibrant green to a shadowy, menacing black. The darkness felt like a physical presence, pressing in on the cabin from all sides. No one wanted to talk about it, but we all knew what was coming. We knew the sun was down and that whatever it was probably out there again. It was a shared, unspoken horror that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. I remember thinking that it felt like we were waiting for a visitor to show up, a visitor we desperately didn't want to see, but who we knew was coming anyway. That night was worse. We barricaded the front door with a couple of armchairs, not that we thought it would do any good. It was more for a sense of control, a feeling that we were at least trying to keep whatever was outside, out. The silence was even heavier than the night before. We sat around the fireplace again, but this time, the laughter was gone. We just huddled together, listening to the woods, to the wind, to the sound of our own breathing. At exactly midnight, the three knocks came again. Bang, bang, bang. This time, they were so loud, so forceful, that the entire door rattled in its frame. It was a sound full of a raw, primal aggression. We didn't even try to pretend it was a prank anymore. We just looked at each other, our eyes wide and full of a terror we couldn't hide. The knock stopped, but then we heard it again. The scraping sound. Only this time, it wasn't a slow drag. It was a furious, rapid scratch, like something was trying to claw its way through the wooden walls. It went around the cabin once, twice, a frantic, desperate sound that made us all jump with every pass. It was a terrifying, rhythmic scratching that seemed to be saying, "I'm here, I know you're here, and I'm not going away." The sound finally stopped, and for a few minutes, there was nothing. We started to feel a sliver of relief, but then a new sound began, a low, guttural humming that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a deep, resonant sound, like a swarm of bees, but coming from something much bigger. It wasn't a growl, not a snarl, just a low hum that sounded almost disappointed. It was the most alien sound I had ever heard. The humming went on for what felt like an eternity. It was so constant, so unyielding, that it started to feel like a part of the cabin itself, a low frequency of fear. We all just sat there, frozen, listening to this sound, trying to figure out what it meant. Was it trying to communicate? Was it just a noise of a creature outside? We had no idea. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was deafening. We waited, our ears straining, but there was nothing. No more knocks, no more scraping, no more humming. The rest of the night passed in a tense, sleepless vigil. We stayed up until the first rays of sunlight pierced through the windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. We were exhausted, our eyes bloodshot, our bodies aching from the stress. But the moment the sun was up, the feeling of being hunted was gone. The cabin felt safe again. We packed up in a hurry, not saying much. We didn't even bother to go outside to check for new footprints. We just wanted to get out of there. We piled into the car, and I remember looking back at the cabin as we drove away. It looked so normal, so peaceful, sitting there in the morning light. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, it had felt like a cage. The drive home was quiet. No one talked about what had happened. It was like a shared secret, something too bizarre and terrifying to put into words. We all felt it, that deep sense of dread and disbelief. But none of us wanted to be the one to break the silence and ask the question that was on all our minds. What the hell was that? Even now, years later, I still think about it. I've searched the internet, read countless stories, and looked up everything from cryptids to local legends, but I've never found anything that fits what we experienced. The footprints, the scraping, the hum, it was all so specific, so unique. We never went back to that cabin, and we never will. I still don't know what was out there that night. A part of me believes it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a person. It was something else entirely, something that wanted to get in, and for some reason, just decided to stop trying. It's a memory that comes back to me on quiet nights, a little shiver down my spine that reminds me there are things in this world that we can't explain, things that exist just outside the reach of our understanding, watching and waiting in the dark.